go on with some more state machine stuff. Chatted with a few listeners after, and I think there's a lot more in state machines to go over. So we're going to stick with state machines for a while, especially now that we have unit tests on them. So one of the things that is kind of cool about state machines is they can observe a lot of different events. So for instance, right now I have two events in this state machine. One is the order submitted, which is the event that creates the state machine. The other is the order status requested. And that is where we want to actually check the order, see if it has a current status, and that's so that the API can return the current status of the order. But there are a lot of different events that we could create and simulate as we kind of go through this example. One of them that I think would be really cool to kind of show is, we've correlated the events so far on order ID, which is a GUID. But what about messages that don't have that order ID? Say for instance, we have a message that a customer is closed their account, and that would be correlated by a customer number. So I thought it would be kind of good to kind of show how that would work and possibly create a little example of how we could see it. So we have the order submitted event, which has the order ID, timestamp, and customer number. If we create a new contract for, let's call this customer, we'll just call it account closed. And in this case, we might have a customer ID, which is a GUID, but we also would have the business identifier of the customer, which would be their customer number. And we will put this over here. Would we have a timestamp for this? I don't know. We'll just stick with this for now. And the customer account closed, we're going to simulate this by putting a new controller in here, which I don't think will take too much effort. We just want a simple controller, so that shouldn't be too hard. I want to add a class, and I'm going to call this the customer controller. I'm going to go steal a bunch of code out of this so that I don't have to write it from scratch. Maybe it'll work. I'm going to get the customer base, controller base, got all that. And we're going to have just a simple method on here, which is going to be, I don't even know. Oh, I guess I could do a delete, right? Sure, let's try that. I'm going to test all of my HTTP skills here. So if I delete, I get a missing reference. In this case, I'm going to get an ID and a customer number. I guess I should call this delete. And we aren't going to do anything super fancy here. In this case, we are going to depend upon the iPublish endpoint interface because we want to publish a message. And all we're going to do is call publish endpoint.publish. We are going to say, what is it? Customer account closed. And obviously we have some invalid properties here. We don't have a timestamp. We have a customer number. Great. It is worth pointing out, this will actually create build errors. I think Rosalind actually creates these as a build error, and you can see in our errors in solution, we get an anonymous type does not match to a property. So by fixing that, we're clearing up that error. So we're going to publish the customer account closed. We're going to return, let's just say OK for now. And this is just something so that we can trigger this event within our system. Now we're going to now go back to the saga repository, or the saga order state machine, and we're going to add this event to it. So if we have an order that's been submitted, and for some reason the customer account is closed, we want to just say account closed. We don't want to fulfill this order at this point. We want to basically cancel this order. So if the order is submitted, in this case, I remember we added that order submitted, but during submitted, we want to ignore order submitted, but when an account is closed, we want to transition to canceled because we want this order to be canceled. So we'll create a new state called canceled. We will add a transition to that so that during submitted, if the account is closed, we want to transition to canceled. Because the customer account closed event doesn't have our order ID in it, we need to correlate it by something else. In this case, we're going to use the customer number to correlate it. So up here where we define the events, we will add that event, account closed, and we will add a correlation expression for it. So in this case, we'll say x.correlate by, and the correlate by includes two values, the instance, comma, context, and we will say instance.customer number equals context.message.customer number. By specifying this correlation expression, and I actually probably want to just say saga here, why not, right? So what it's going to do is it's going to use this to build an expression to pass this to the saga repository to actually retrieve that saga instance. Question in the chat is why not include that in during any? I could put it in during any, but depending upon the state of the order, I might have to do different things. Like if the order has been accepted and sent off to fulfillment, I may need to actually send some sort of other command to another system to try to stop those items from shipping, or just because their account is closed doesn't mean that something they've already sent wouldn't already be in a fulfillment state to where those lines have been packed and shipped. And I might have to do something different then, as to like grab it out of the truck, or just accept that that order will still be fulfilled because it's already been shipped and it'll be billed to their account, but their account is still closed to do that. So that's why it wouldn't be enduring any in this case. So now we have a correlation for that. We can correlate this customer number, but we're going to see something really kind of fun happen here when we do this, because when I recognize that adding this is going to do something interesting. So let's go to our unit tests first, because that's fun. So we have our unit tests now that we have them. We're not going to respond to a status check, but in this case, we want to respond to that event and assure that the item was canceled. So should cancel when customer account closed. So in this case, we create our state machine, we create an order submitted, we have our customer number, we verify that it's created and that it exists in that state. And then we are going to say harness.bus.publish publish customer account closed. So the same thing we did in the other one. We're going to pass the customer ID equals, I don't care what it is in this case. Just pass it an ID, don't care. Customer number, I have to actually spell this out, equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I'm going to wait for the saga to exist in the canceled state. So I've taken the test that we previously had that put it into the submitted state. So I've put it into that state. One of the questions that comes up a lot on Stack Overflow and others is, how do I get a saga in a state so that I can actually do some work against it? Well, this is how I do it. I basically just send it the events so that it gets into the appropriate state. That way I know that I'm not doing anything weird and missing fields or properties or things like that. And because it's all in memory, generally it goes pretty quick. So I'm going to send this, I'm going to send the customer ID, and I'm going to expect that to be in a canceled state. And then I'm going to verify that that works by running the test. Okay, we're green, it ran. So now if I go over to my projects, which I think 2 is the website, I'm gonna kill that. 3 is the service, I'm gonna kill that. I'm gonna fire these back up, restart my website. Restart my service. Now I'm going to go back here to this page, go to my Swagger UI, refresh that. You can see now I have customer as another thing. I can now call delete on it. So first I want to create an order, which means I have to go get a GUID. Copy, go back to here. So I'm going to post an order. I'm going to try it out. I'm going to post this. My customer number is going to be 8675309. Yeah, that's right. I'm going to create that. Now we have the order created. It has that customer number. Now we're going to go up here and we're going to delete that customer. And what are we going to expect that's going to happen? Anyone? Anyone? He is going to die an incredibly horrible death. So what do we have here? Warning, retry, order state. Redis Saga repository does not support queries. So because of the way this event correlates, it actually has to pass a link query to the Saga repo, and Redis does not support queries. So this is going to retry, and then it's going to fail, and it's going to fault, and it isn't going to get that. So my unit test is not going. So while my unit test passed, the unit test was using the in-memory Saga repository, which supports queries. But because Redis doesn't support queries, it was unable to process that message. And so now if I go back into where did it create the Saga instance? If I go back in here and I get that message and get that Saga instance and I go to check the status of it, I'm going to see that it is still in submitted and was not in fact canceled, because the Saga repository doesn't know how to process a query because it's in Redis. And if I go back to the Redis CLI and do get with that query ID, you can see it's in the submitted state, but it does have the customer number as we expected. So that's one of the limitations of Redis. It doesn't support queries like that because sagas are implemented by keys. So how could we fix that? We could use something like MongoDB. We could use Martin. We could use a bunch of, we could use Entity Framework, whether it's the .NET Core version or, probably the .NET Core version. It's a lot newer. Any other Saga repository that's going to support a query, that would work on. But because we're using Redis here, it isn't going to work. I could go ahead and stand up MongoDB real quick. I don't know what's involved in that. I don't know if I have one sitting around. I have one right here that I could fire up, I guess. So if I started that up, and then if I go back to my service, which is here, kill that, went into my service, which has the program, which is specifying Redis. But because my state machine is using the iVersion Saga, I would have to actually go and manage the NuGet package for this and say masstransit.mongodb. I would have to add that there. And then go back to the state machine. And because the state had to have that iVersion Saga from Redis, I would have to get the MongoDB version of iVersion Saga. That seems like something that would be really nice to put in a common one. Unfortunately, it's different for each one, because for Entity Framework, it's a byte array. For Mongo, it's an int, and I can't remember what it is for Redis. It's probably also an int, but it's different for each one. So, it would be nice to have the interfaces in the core MassTransit assembly so the state machine states don't have to reference it. But because of the fact that each transport or each persistence library is different, there isn't really a great way to standardize that. So I've added the MongoDB to that. If I go back to my service, I can see that I get an error here. I can't use Redis because it doesn't support that type. thank you in the chat for that, because otherwise I would be sitting here pulling my hair out trying to figure out why that didn't work. So it was like, don't forget the beeson ID. Yes. So order state, because we're using, actually, I think I can forget it. Totally going to think I owned this. Let's see here. I think that drove me nuts enough that I finally fixed it. So I think if I go to the MongoDB configurator, I want to say that that's fully supported already. It might be, it might not be. Yeah, I can't remember. I guess we'll try it, but I want to say that I added it to where it automatically registers it with the mapping. I could be completely wrong here, but I want to say that I did. So let's try it without it first, and then if it fails, we'll go back and add it. Because I want to say with the Saga configuration rewrite, I made it work, but we're going to find out shortly. So now I've just changed that to MongoDB. Literally, all I did was go and say, I want to use MongoDB repository, change the state, and now I'm going to see if it runs. So I'm going to go out here. I'm going to try to fire up my service. I don't think I have to create anything with Mongo. I think it creates it all by default. Or not. Database factory. Oh, database name must be specified. So I do have to configure some stuff. You know, I bet if I went and read my own documentation, it would tell me that. Let's see here. Okay, there's the beeson ID, so maybe I still need it, but we're going to find out. Okay, so here's the connection in the database name. So I do need that. So let's go ahead and crank that in there. MongoDB, and we're going to call this the order DB. Why not? Because these are orders. Sounds good. Let's see if it runs this time. Okay, so we started. That's a good sign. Let's go back to the website. We're going to have to create a new order because we're on a new database now, so all of our old Saga state is gone. So let's go ahead and create a new order. We'll just use the exact same one we did here, different database. Looks like it might have worked. We'll find out when we go up to get the status. Looks like we're not working. ID does not match a field of. All right, so yeah, we definitely got to fix that. So yes, beeson ID is still required. I think that is definitely one to understand. So because we're using MongoDB now, we have to put the beeson ID flag on there. Yes, I know you died horribly. Okay, so now that we have the beeson ID, we're great. Save it. Go back out here, do the run again. Hopefully it fires up. Come back here, execute this, and we get a 404 not found. Oh, because it errored every time. It didn't actually even create the order. So if I execute this again, I see that I got the accepted. I come out here and execute the get status. I got the good status. I show it as submitted. Now, if I come here to delete the customer, well, that worked, but okay, so did it actually work this time? Order state, there's the ID. No, did we get an error? No. Order state error, yeah, we're still getting an error. An error occurred deserializing the correlation ID property of state machine order state cannot deserialize a GUID from beeson type object ID. So what am I doing wrong here? Oh, because I actually, no? Now I'm confused. So I'm going to kill that again. I have the beeson ID. It's the correlation ID. There's the version ID. Is there anything else I have to configure on that? Beeson ID, correlation ID. If I go to the program CS, I'm just going to change this to orders, put it in a different database. Oh boy, that's fun. How do I block that person? Boom, done. Gotta love spam. So let's go. Well, the connection name I think is by default that. So let's put it in a new database and see if there's something weird there. The beeson ID is on there. So if I save all that out, and if I rerun the project, so now we have to go back and we have to create it again because we lost our database because we went to a new one. So this should give me a not found. 404 not found, good. No errors in here. So now I post the order, accepted. And where is the saga created? Okay, created, added. Okay, so it looks like it was saved. If I go and I get the status now, I should get the 200. Response body's good. State is submitted. Use the existing saga instance there. Now if I execute this, let's see what happens. Oh, yep, okay, it worked this time. So it must have just been something, a bad record in the database with the same name. Because now we can see that the order state received check order. That's when I check the status. Now the order state, saga order state, that's the instance. I used an existing instance, and the message that was processed was the customer account closed. And then it goes in here. So now if I go and I look at the status of that order, I should see that it's canceled. So there I've correlated that event in. Thanks for working through that. Sometimes, you got to figure these things out. And I hadn't used Mongo in a while, so it was kind of new to me. But we got through it. So awesome. So now I have an event in my state machine that is correlated by a customer number and is then queried out to the Saga repo, which then lets me observe events that are not necessarily mine, so to speak. Because again, event producers, when you think about an event contract, it's owned by the system that produces the event. The Saga state machine is just observing that event and then taking action on it. So that was the first thing I wanted to cover in this step. Let's see what else I have here. So that was event correlation. So one thing that I do see people often trying to initiate a Saga instance with a non-GUID event. So for instance, here when I have the order status requested and I correlate it by the ID, with the order ID, if this was not a GUID and I wanted to create a new instance, one of the other properties on here is called select ID, which lets you use which returns the identifier for the Saga instance. If you're generating this, like some people do just, new ID.nextGUID, or they do GUID.newGUID, which just makes me want to scream a little bit, but I don't cry too hard. When they do this, you're generating a new GUID for the Saga instance. Now, if you have multiple events that are correlated by some non-unique identifier that becomes the ID, you can end up with multiple Saga instances. So it's up to the Saga repository to actually enforce uniqueness. So if you're correlating by a property like customer number and you only ever wanted one instance of the Saga for a customer number, you would want to put a unique key on that would fail if you try to insert two copies. Because if you don't, you'll get two Saga instances. Now, as long as you're using something from the message to generate the ID, that isn't a problem. It's only a case when you're actually generating a new identifier for a Saga that isn't going to be unique based on the content of different events creating that Saga instance. So when you have multiple events in your initially, know that that can happen. And why would you put multiple events in initially? Because events come out of order. For instance, if I had an order accepted event, I could theoretically get that message before I receive the order submitted event. And so I may actually create the order state in an accepted state without having received the order submitted and then receive the order submitted later. That's why we put the during any order submitted, because we wanted to be able to handle that anywhere else. So that's kind of how that works. Anyway, just useful information. That was one of the things I wanted to go over. So The other part and kind of the next step within state machines that I wanted to cover is the activities. So, and unfortunately, automatonymous activities have the same name as routing xlib activities. You know, they're both activities, but they're different things. So when I go into then in a state machine and I'm applying some logic, this is an activity. Even transition to is an activity. If I look at what transition to does, all it is doing is creating a transition activity. And a transition activity just says, hey, put me in that state. And that's literally all it does. I mean, it's pretty brain dead. An activity implements an activity interface, which has a pretty simple set. In this case, we're doing event-based activities. So when we create an activity, such as by using .then or .respond or .publish or .send or any of the methods that can be chained into a state machine definition, that ultimately adds an activity to a behavior list. And each of those activities is executed in order by calling this execute method. And this is very similar. In fact, it uses the same structure as all of the different pipeline building within MassTransit, so that when I call execute, I'm passing a behavior context and then the next behavior in the chain. So it's allowing me to build all these together. And activities are, it's the responsibility activity to call the next activity in the chain, or if they throw an exception, the behavior runtime will actually call the faulted method for those activities, allowing them to unroll. So basically to compensate on the way back. Yeah, so that's what a transition activity does. One of the comments after the first session that kind of came in is like, they could see where a state machine could get pretty involved. You know, when you get a lot of logic in here and a lot of code in here, you can end up with a lot of business logic. We built a pretty complex healthcare interoperability platform using these state machines, and some of the states and transitions and such get really extensive. I mean, there's a lot of business logic in there. And so one of the things that we introduced was these activities so that you could build your own. So if I wanted to create an activity for my order state machine, within the state machines, I could just create a new folder because I like folders, but yeah, order state machine activities. That sounds great. And then we'll create a new class in here. Now, this is one of the weird things about writers. Normally, I would use this to create a class, but it never works. It just like goes away. I have no idea why that is. Weirdest thing, but if I right click and say add, it works. I don't know why. Anybody knows what I'm doing wrong? I would love to have the answer for that because I hate reaching for the trackpad to do this. So I'm just going to create a, I don't know, I'm just going to call this like an accept order activity because I don't know what I want it to do. I just want to show how you would create one of these. And so an accept order activity, it's going to implement iActivity from, and you'll notice I get a lot of courier-based type things here. And is it activity? I can't even remember at this point. No, it is activity without the I. Oh man, this is really going to make me angry. Activity. The instance is the order state, and the event is going to be I have to create an event that's going to trigger this. Because if I just do it this way, it's going to work for any event. And that's one way you can create an activity, is you can say, for any event that comes in, I want this activity to execute. But I want to create an actual message that's going to do this. So we have the order submitted. I'm going to go ahead and create the order accepted event. And the order accepted would be like if an external validation system had said, hey, you know what, this order is good to go. I'm just going to go ahead and create that. So I have a new contract called order accepted. It has my order ID and a timestamp, nothing super complicated. But my accept order activity is going to be looking for that event as part of its execution. So this will create 4 different methods that I have to implement. One is probe, which is used for discovery. I can actually generate an output of what all of this is. In this case, I'm going to say context dot add, what is this, the accept order activity? get my snake case or my kebab case back in here. Name, I don't know. I'm trying to remember what I put in here. There we go. The accept, which I want to say this is like visitor.visit this. And those are, if we go back to the state machine here. If we look at the transition to, because this will give us an idea of what those methods really are involved to do. It's like the transition activity. The probe in this one creates a scope called transition, and that's the activity, and so that's what I need to do in mine. So I need to create a scope called accept order. And in this case, I don't need to add any parameters to it because that's not really relevant. But that creates a scope so that when it tries to display the output, it knows what to put in there. And then visitor.visit this, I had already put that, so that's what that means. So those are just things that are used so that when you're creating visualizations of a state machine or the activity, it provides information that can be drawn out. And if I have time, I'll cover that today. The execute is called when the event has come in and I want to call the activity. So in this case, I'm not going to do anything. So I'm just going to await next.execute context. I'll add my code in here later. Do something later. For faulted, I don't care. I don't, if I had to compensate in something, like if I had put some properties into the instance and I want to clean them out, I could handle it here. But for now, I'm just going to return next.faulted context because I'm not going to do anything. So I'm just going to pass that back. If I don't do that, I break the chain and I can cause other activities to be able to unroll, to not be able to unroll their behaviors. So now I'm going to go back to my state machine. I'm going to add my new event, which is now called order accepted. And I have to add the correlation to this because I'm not correlating off any automatic identifiers. And I will say during any, we'll do it within the during any, why not? So we'll just do it pretty simple. We'll just say during submitted, which is right here. When account closed, comma, when order accepted, activity, and in this case, I want to say new accept order activity. Does that work? I think I have to pass it something. New accept order activity. Of type. Maybe that's it. I should have looked at the help before I did this. Okay, I think that's right. If we do of type is a T activity. Yeah, I think that's right. Yep, of type, that activity. Great. So this is where it gets a little interesting because I don't know if it'll create this or not. I guess we'll find out. This is normally used with an IOC container, and the container will resolve this out. But I think because I don't have any constructor arguments on this, it will work. If this had constructor arguments on it, it wouldn't, because I would have to provide a factory method to it to be able to actually create those. But let's see what happens. So we have a state called accepted. In this case, we're going to do our order accepted activity, and then we're going to say transition to accepted. Now we're going to need some way to generate that event. Let's go to the unit tests. So if we get our unit tests for our order state machine, and we're going to change it so that now we go to should accept when order is accepted. So we're going to have our state machine, we get our order submitted event, and then we're going to publish our order accepted event. Same order ID, and then we're going to expect to be in the accepted state. So all we changed on that, and I mean, you could put this in an on test fixture setup to where it always gives you an initial one. It just depends on how you want to structure your tests. The test harness is so fast, it's almost like not even worth trying to get too complicated on it, but the cut and paste can get annoying. So in that case, like having a method to get you into a state, you could do that to kind of dry up your tests a little bit. I'm just going to see if this works. Okay, so that test passed. It actually accepted that message. It printed it out. Let's go make that activity actually write something out. I'm going to do the evil of all evils. I'm just going to do a console write line. I don't even know if this shows up. I'm going to look at context.data.order ID. Because remember, inside Automatonymous, .data is the actual message. So let's look at our unit test. Let's see if this happens. Oh, yep, hello world, order ID is this. You can see that my activity did get called, it executed, and I'm able to kind of put the behavior of an activity instead of just putting a Lambda method of .then or .then async. I'm actually able to put the behavior off in here. I alluded to it, but the nice thing about this is if my constructor did have dependencies, like let's say I needed some sort of external components, you never want to put those on the state machine. So like dependencies on the state machine, no, bad, never. Like don't put dependencies on your state machine. The only time you would do that is if you like needed some configuration stuff, but even then, that's like, if you did an I options or something like that. I don't recommend doing that because it just embeds a lot of functionality into your unit test that you have to have there. So, sometimes it's unavoidable, but I don't take dependencies on anything, especially anything that should be scoped on the state machine, because the state machine is created once and it lives for the life of the process. It's the behavior. Behavior is completely separate from data. Data is within the order state class that's persisted out to the storage repository. So definitely just kind of a guideline there. If the activity does have a dependency, like you need to pull a database connection, stuff like that, that's why you want to use activities, because you can put constructor dependencies on here. And if you create those within a DI container, they'll actually set up for you. So I could create a unit test that actually uses the dependency injection container. You can find a lot of those within the GitHub repo of MassTransit. So if you actually just go to the MassTransit GitHub repository, and if you look within the container tests project, you can see like for different containers, there's all the different tests for each one of the containers. So, the common dependency, this is MSDI. If you go out and look at how they set up the container, you can see that, for a particular consumer that has dependencies, or in this case, the Saga state machine, you can see that the add MassTransit is called, and I add a scoped value of this publish test started activity. So that's added to the container just through the service collection. And then the actual test, the common underscore Saga state machine test, when it's registering that state machine, which has a dependency on that publish activity. So that's within the container tests project within the GitHub repo. Plenty of examples of how to do that and find more information. I'm not sure how well documented that is. I would have to take a look and see, but there is work on how to do the custom activities within the docs. So you can kind of see how that is set up, how it gets the submit order command, and how it has the dependency on consume context or whatever. So just a way to kind of see that there as a point of reference. So let me look at what else I wanted to cover for today. We did event correlation, we did custom activities, we talked about some of the trade-offs of why you'd want to do things. I'm gonna try this. I don't know that it's gonna exactly work, but I'm gonna give it a shot because I'm feeling like it might go well. If it doesn't go well, Yeah, we'll live and learn. But I talked about that probe and that mass transit kind of thing and how those state machines are built up. I want to look at adding another test here that just says, let's just call it test. Show me the state machine. And to do this, I'm going to need to go into NuGet, and for my tests project, I am going to need to add Automatonymous.visualizer. And this is, I mean, seriously, this is more of a flex than anything because I think it's pretty cool. I'm quoted in a podcast years ago of talking about how I don't like doodleware and I don't like drag and drop programming metaphors. So one of the things that I like about a code first approach is that the code tells the whole story. But sometimes you need to be able to communicate, and to communicate, sometimes it's useful to say something like get graph. So with automatonymous.visualizer, you can actually get a graph of the nodes within the state machine. And I'm trying to remember how I can draw this out. Graph dot edges vertices to BSON to JSON to BSON document. Is it serialized to GraphML? I'm trying to remember which one of these it is, and this is where I'm going to have to go to my cheat sheet. If I go to MassTransit, Automatonymous, I thought I would remember this, but it's been like an hour since I read through it. So now I got to go look, which you can see exactly where I'm stealing this from. Machine.graph.getGraph, and oh, here it is, state machine graph viz generator. So do I even have that? I wonder if I do. I don't think I need anything else. Okay, good. So I want to use these two lines of code. I'm going to create this graph viz generator for this graph. I'm going to get the dots, and then I'm going to do a console.writeLine of the dots. And now I'm going to run this test. Show me the state machine. So I get a digraph of this is the actual file. So if I go out and create a new thing here and I say, let's go edit my state dot. I paste that in here. If I go over to OmniGraffle and I say file open, and I go to my state point dot, I open it up, and I want a hierarchical graph. Boom. I get my state machine as a visualized entity. So I can actually come in, I can slide it around. I have my initial state. My order submitted comes in, I transition to the submitted state. From submitted, if account closed, I go to canceled. I don't know why the errors go back to order submitted. That's kind of weird, but it's probably during anything, to be honest. And I go from submitted, order accepted, I go to accepted. And I think it's because in the accepted state, I can accept order submitted, which is just going to put me back into no state. So it's kind of weird there when you do that stuff. But anyway, it gives you a visualization that you can actually share out. It also lets you kind of find weird loops in your state machine if you see, where you've kind of just done a little too much during any. So anyway, that's just kind of a little bonus tip. You can use that Automatonymous visualizer to generate the dot file loaded into, I think it works with Visio too. Anything that open graph is, I think there's even a command line tool that'll do a force directed graph for you. And I'm sure D3 has a really cool way to show this with a JavaScript front end. So anyway, I thought that would be kind of cool to show. Anyway, that's hopefully enough content for this episode. I will kind of point out these will be archived on YouTube. So Twitch keeps things around for 14 days, but I'm transferring them to YouTube as well. So they'll also be shared on YouTube at some point. So with that, I'll finish up this episode and we'll catch you back later.